in the dust-blown stretch of the frontier, where the horizon bled into a fading gold, Marshal Weston Hale rode steadily along the trail, his silhouette cutting a solitary figure against the dying sun. The leather of his coat, worn from years of travel, creaked with each movement, and the soft clink of his spurs blended with the whisper of the wind. He had known peace on these roads once, long ago, but the West no longer offered peace without demanding a price. Trouble had been stirring for weeks, rumbling like a storm that wouldn't break, and now it had reached the quiet edges of Bramble Creek. Weston had been called to the settlement on urgent word that a ranch had burned to ashes, leaving behind only the faint scent of smoke and the chilling silence of unanswered questions. The message had been brief, but the desperation in the rider's eyes had told him enough. Something dark had woken in these lands, something that carried the kind of weight that pulled a man away from familiar ground and thrust him toward shadows he'd hoped to forget. When Bramble Creek finally came into view, it looked like a town abandoned by time. Buildings slouched against the earth, their frames groaning with every breath of wind. Lanterns flickered weakly behind dusty windows, as though scared to cast too much light in the growing dusk. Weston dismounted near the general store, boots landing with a heavy thud. He sensed eyes watching him, slipping behind curtains and around corners, yet no one stepped forward to greet him. No one except the young woman, sitting alone on the wooden porch. She rested a rifle across her lap, her posture quiet but ready. Her hat obscured her eyes until she lifted her head, just enough for him to see the grief sharpened into resolve. "You the marshal?" she asked. "Weston Hale," he replied. "And you must be Lena Carr." She nodded once. Though young, her face bore the strain of someone who had seen far more than she should have. "My family's ranch is gone," she said, her voice tight. "Burned in the night. I was told a marshal could help me find out why." "That's what I'm here for," Weston answered. "Tell me what you saw." Lena shifted, fingers tightening around the stock of her rifle. "Shadows," she said softly. "Riders moving fast. 6 of them, maybe more. They didn't try to hide their tracks, but the fire erased everything. One wore a long coat with a mark burned into it. A star, crooked along one point, like it had been bent or snapped." Weston felt unease coil in his gut. "You recognize the mark?" She shook her head. "My father did. Said men had been gathering near the valley. Drifters and deserters. The kind of men who would burn the world if someone promised them land afterward. He didn't want to speak about them. Said even talking was dangerous." "And now he's gone," Weston murmured, voice solemn. Lena's jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. "I won't let what they did fade into smoke." Before Weston could respond, a sharp whistle sliced through the air. Quick, deliberate. He drew his revolver in one swift motion. Shadows darted between buildings, their movements too controlled to be townsfolk. "Inside," Weston said, but Lena did not budge. "That whistle," she whispered. "I heard it the night before our ranch burned." A second whistle came, farther down the road. Another followed behind the stable. Weston's grip tightened. Someone was testing them, circling like wolves around a campfire. A figure stepped into the open at the far end of the street, a tall man in a long coat. Moonlight glanced off its surface, catching the unmistakable crooked star. As soon as Weston saw it, the man withdrew, fading into the dark as though swallowed whole. "They're not here to kill us," Weston said. Lena exhaled unevenly. "Then why come at all?" "Because they want us to know they're watching," he replied, lowering but not holstering his gun. "And because they think no one here can stand against them." She rose slowly, rifle still in hand. "Can we?" Weston finally sheathed his revolver. "At first light, we start looking for the truth. Carefully. These aren't common outlaws. They're organized, bold, and certain they can't be touched." Lena stood beside him now, her grief burning into something sharper. "Then we don't wait," she said. "My father said they were building something dangerous. If we sit still, more towns will burn." Her resolve, though fueled by loss, impressed him. "We'll be ready," he told her. Still, he knew the night would not be quiet. Not with riders this bold, lurking, just beyond the lantern light. The crooked star burned in his thoughts, an omen he couldn't shake. Something ruthless had risen in these hills, and Lena's tragedy was only its beginning. As the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint smell of distant smoke, Weston scanned the ridge beyond the settlement. The moon traced the jagged horizon, but nothing stirred now. Whoever had watched them had retreated. He sheathed his weapon fully, though his stance remained taut. This quiet wasn't safety, it was the breath drawn before violence. "We can't do this alone," Lena said. "If those riders have numbers, we need help. People we can trust." Weston nodded. "Red Bluff has men who'd stand against this. But getting there won't be easy if the riders track us." "Then we move before they expect it," she replied. He studied her carefully and saw not recklessness, but strength shaped by loss. "We leave before dawn," he said. "Gather what we can, find fresh horses, and pray we reach Red Bluff before the riders strike again." Lena looked toward the hills where darkness pooled like ink. "Luck doesn't come easy out here." "No," Weston agreed softly, "but courage might carry us where luck won't." And in that fragile promise, their dangerous journey truly began under starlit skies. Cole pushed deeper into the valley as night gathered like a tightening fist, each mile reminding him of the choices that had driven him away and the fears that now drove him back. The sky burned with fading streaks of crimson, and the last light glimmered along the edge of his revolver as though urging him forward. He knew the men hunting him would not stop until they had torn apart everything he had tried to shield from his past. The thought of Alara and the boy waiting in that fragile cabin filled him with a dread he had not felt in years, a dread sharper than gunfire or betrayal. He urged his horse into a quicker pace, whispering a quiet promise into the cold air, one meant for no ears but his own. Alara had paced the length of the cabin until the floorboards knew her weight better than her own weary bones. Jonah tried to follow her steps at first, mimicking her movements with small, uncertain strides, but the tension in the room eventually pressed him into the corner near the hearth. There, with trembling hands, he traced shapes in the soot, looking up every few moments as though expecting an answer from the quiet walls. Alara wished she could offer him comfort, yet the truth pressed against her like a blade. Danger was coming, and the man she feared and longed for in equal measure might not reach them in time. She knelt beside Jonah, brushing his hair from his forehead, murmuring soft words that shook despite her resolve. In the woods, Cole found fresh tracks, hoof prints deep enough to mark the urgency of their riders. He recognized the patterns, the heavy stride of Von Mercer's horse, the uneven gait of his second-in-command, Pike. Their presence twisted something inside him. Von was not a man who approached with reason. He approached with ownership, as if the world and every soul within it belonged to him. Cole had witnessed the man's cruelty firsthand, had once walked the same dark roads before clawing his way free. His hand brushed the ground, feeling the lingering warmth in the prints. They were close, too close. He rose, jaw set, each muscle coiled with the grim understanding that his reckoning had finally arrived. Alara finally forced herself to sit, though the chair creaked beneath her like a warning. She kept one hand close to the rifle Jonah had retrieved for her, her fingers brushing the barrel as though it were a lifeline. Jonah watched her with wide, frightened eyes, and she offered him the softest smile she could manage. She told him stories in a whisper, stories of the prairie, of how his father had once stood against a storm that threatened to tear their world apart. She left out the details that would haunt him, the darkness Cole had fought to bury. She focused instead on the man he had become, one forged in hardship but defined now by something gentler, something she had once believed she could never trust again. Cole moved steadily, guided by instinct and the fragile thread of hope that he was not too late. When he reached a ridge overlooking Alara's homestead, he stopped cold. 6 riders lingered at the edge of the clearing, their silhouettes framed by torchlight that flickered like hungry fire. He could see Vaughn's unmistakable stance, upright, confident, as though he already owned the land beneath his boots. Pike circled like a restless wolf, muttering orders to the others. Cole felt the old rage rise within him, but beneath it, deeper still, burned something steadier, a determination born not from vengeance, but from love. He checked his revolver, whispered a final breath, and descended the ridge without another thought. Inside, Ilara heard the distant shuffle of hooves and stiffened. She pushed Jonah behind the table, guiding him to crouch low where shadows offered some illusion of safety. The knocking came moments later, hard, deliberate, the kind of knocking that carried no respect. Ilara clutched the rifle and took a breath that scraped her throat raw. She called out, demanding their names, though she already knew who would answer. Vaughn's voice seeped through the wooden walls, like a venom she had long hoped never to hear again. He spoke her name as though he owned it, as though she were still the frightened girl he'd once tried to break. She raised the rifle and aimed it at the door, her hands steady despite the terror raging inside her. Cole descended the ridge like a shadow breaking loose from the dark. He moved with purpose, each step stripping away doubt. He raised his revolver and fired once into the air. The explosive sound tore through the yard, bringing Vaughn's men to a standstill. Ilara flinched inside, clutching Jonah with one arm. Vaughn turned slowly, and when he saw Cole emerging from the tree line, a wicked smile crawled across his scarred face. He welcomed Cole as though greeting an overdue debtor. The two men stared across the distance, the air taut between them. Vaughn accused Cole of betrayal, of running from the life he owed allegiance to. Cole countered with a single truth. He owed nothing to a man who had built his world on cruelty. Pike reached for his holster, but Cole shook his head with a calm that unsettled even the torches. He told them that if they wanted blood, they would have to go through him first. And, unlike the man he once was, he would not run this time. The standoff thickened, silence settling like frost over the yard. Ilara watched from the window, her heart pounding against her ribs. She saw the man Cole had become. Harder, wiser, and fueled not by violence, but by the fierce need to protect what he had almost lost forever. For the first time that night, she felt hope take root. She whispered Cole's name beneath her breath, not as a plea, but as a promise that she finally believed he could keep. The wind stilled around them, waiting for the moment when every choice, every fear, and every quiet truth would finally collide there. The storm rolled in with a slow, deliberate menace, as if the heavens themselves had chosen to bear witness to the reckoning waiting at the valley's edge. Elias rode ahead of the others, his silhouette a lone shard against the bruised sky, shoulders squared yet trembling beneath the weight of what he carried inside. The air was thick with dust and unspoken truths, and each hoofbeat felt like a countdown to the moment he had both dreaded and needed. Behind him, Mara kept pace, her jaw set, her eyes sharp as flint. She knew the storm within him far better than the one gathering above. She had watched the man she loved fight, every battle but the one tearing him apart, and now she feared this final stand might claim more than just blood. They reached the abandoned ridge, where the land stretched wide and barren, offering no shelter from the conflict that had finally cornered them. Elias dismounted, his boots sinking into the softened dirt while the wind carried the faint metallic tang of rain. Before them, on the far end of the ridge, Victor waited with his men, their dark coats snapping like flags of war. Victor's expression was carved from stone, cold, resolute, and steeped in the kind of hatred that had been passed down like a family heirloom. Theirs was a feud older than their memories, one fueled by grief that neither man had asked for but both had inherited. Mara stepped close to Elias, her voice low but steady. "You don't owe him your life. Not today." Elias didn't answer. Instead, he pulled from his coat the worn letter that had kept him awake for nights, his father's confession, written in a trembling hand before death claimed him. The truth that had shattered the foundation of everything Elias thought he knew. It revealed the lie at the heart of the feud. Victor's father had not been murdered by Elias's kin, as the story went. He had taken his own life, consumed by debts and despair. The letter's words had the power to end the generations of vengeance, but Elias feared they might ignite a new flame instead. As the first drops of rain spattered against the ground, Elias walked forward. Each step echoed with the ghosts of those who had fallen before him. Victor's eyes narrowed. I see you finally found your courage, he called out, his voice rising over the wind. But courage won't save you now. Elias stopped a few paces away, holding the letter with a grip that betrayed his trembling resolve. I didn't come to fight you, he said, his tone carrying the weight of the truth he was about to unleash. I came to end this. Victor scoffed, but there was a flicker in his gaze, uncertainty or perhaps fear. Elias unfolded the letter, its edges frayed, the ink smudged by time and grief. This feud, it was built on a lie. Your father wasn't murdered. The words hit the air like a crack of lightning. Victor stepped forward, fury igniting in his stare. But Elias continued, refusing to yield. He ended his own life. My father knew the truth, but he buried it to protect us both from the shame. He was wrong to hide it. I'm here to make it right. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Victor's men exchanged uneasy glances. The rain intensified, pelting the earth in relentless rhythm. Then Victor's voice shattered the silence. You expect me to believe your father's cowardice over the blood spilled for decades? Elias held out the letter. Read it yourself. Victor hesitated, and in that moment Mara felt hope stir, a fragile, trembling thing. But as Victor reached for the letter, a shot rang out. The sound tore through the storm, through the ridge, through everything. Mara screamed. Elias staggered, the letter fluttering from his hand as he fell to one knee, blood blooming across his shoulder. Chaos erupted. Victor spun toward his own men, but the shooter, a rogue loyalist determined to protect the old narrative, had already fired again. Mara rushed to Elias, dragging him behind a jagged outcrop as bullets sliced through the rain. Elias gritted his teeth, the pain searing through him, but his eyes stayed locked on the letter now half-soaked in mud. Don't let it end like this, he whispered, breath ragged. Mara pressed her hand against his wound, fury burning in her voice. I won't. With a surge of determination, she grabbed the letter, rose from cover, and faced Victor directly. The storm raged around her, wind whipping her hair, but her stance was unshakable. You want the truth, she yelled. Then take it from me. Her defiance froze the battleground. Victor's gaze shifted from the blood on Elias's coat to the letter clenched in Mara's hand. Something inside him broke, an old, rusted chain snapping after too many years of strain. He raised his hand, signaling his men to stand down. The shooter, realizing his mistake, tried to flee, but Victor's men seized him. Silence rippled across the ridge, broken only by the storm's distant rumble. Victor stepped forward, his boots sinking into the mud, and took the letter from Mara with trembling fingers. As he read, the fury in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a hollow, aching realization. When he finally looked up, the man before them was no longer a vessel of vengeance, but a son confronting the truth for the first time. It should have ended long ago, he murmured. Elias, weak but conscious, met his gaze. Then let it end now. The storm began to break, the clouds parting just enough for pale light to spill across the ravaged earth. And in that fragile sliver of calm, the cycle of blood finally cracked. Behind them, the valley breathed again, as if relieved that justice had at last chosen a different path. Yet, even as peace settled over the ridge, each of them knew healing would require courage deeper than any blade ever forged true.